Please welcome Jartinder Kaur.
Having fun? Yes. So we are in the executive breakout session, the way we work, innovating better together. As part of this session, beginning with an introduction of our current way of understanding the leadership, and why is that limiting us when it comes to leveraging our own capacity as well as our team's capacity. Our diverse way of seeing the world, as well as our innate drive to create and innovate. We will then evolve our focus into total leadership, and we'll explore what are those different origins of our current understanding of leadership, and how is that limiting us? What are the differences we have, and how do those differences lead us to better leverage and engage in at work? What are the two halves of the leadership capacity? How do we leverage the other half to double our capacity to effectively engage and work with others? What are some of the valuable skills and qualities that exist, which we are only peripherally aware of? And now, how do we combine those to engage and support? How do we combine all these to enhance not just our leadership, but as well as our innovation capacity? So having said that, I will welcome Jennifer Kenny to the stage. She's a speaker, mentor, trainer, and facilitator. Good to have you here, Jennifer. So Jennifer Kenny speaks, writes, and consults on leadership innovation with her primary focus on two of the biggest levers for innovation, which is diversity and transformation. She has over 25 years of experience in strategy, leadership development, and information technology. Jennifer has also spoken at multiple conferences, which include Stanford University Executive Briefing Program, University of Colorado's Profile in American Enterprise Program, University of Santa Clara, Levy School of Business MBA program. She has presented at the Northern California Human Resource Council Annual Conference, Women in Technology Annual Conference, Irish Female Leaders in Silicon Valley, and the Hilton Worldwide Women's Leadership Conference in Shanghai. She has held multiple senior consulting positions with Accenture, Booz Allen, and Gartner. She has played senior executive roles with Wells Fargo and Cisco. She was a CIO with SRI International, formerly known as Stanford Research Institute, where she led the enterprise-wide IT transformation program. She does have many awards under her belt. Some of them include being internationally acclaimed IDG Jamo Enterprise Entrepreneurship Award. She won the Intel University of California Business Plan Award. Jennifer was chair of the board of the Global Women's Leadership Network, and she is a fellow of the Irish Computer Society. Jennifer holds an MSc Honors in Engineering Geology from Imperial College, University of London, and a BSc Honors in Geology and Chemistry from University College, Dublin. With that said, Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I like these big, long introductions. They make me feel decrepit. But I think the bottom line is I'm a nerd. so I'm in good company. Today I want to talk to you about a different way of looking at leadership from the perspective of women, because after all, that's what this is about for all of us. So one of the things that I would always do when I go to these conferences, I'd sit beside some very nice person and I go, I wonder if I should say hello to them, or if they should say hello to me, or if I should give them my business card, or maybe I'm being too pushy if I say hello. So I'm just going to ask you to do it. Say hello to the person next to you, introduce yourselves, exchange business cards. We're here to network and to support each other, so please do. Okay, fantastic, thank you. There's an Irish expression called have a good chat, and what I meant was introduce yourselves. I didn't mean have a good chat. So my big question for today that I want us to look at together is, why does gender balance help us innovate better? We're going to look at some of the numbers that are coming out of the results of increasing gender balance, even though we're still only at the beginning stages of it. But we know from those results that we are innovating better when we have better balanced teams, leadership teams, companies, boards. The question is, we don't really know why. So what we're doing is we'll put 10 blue M&Ms and 10 pink M&Ms and stick them in a room and hope that they innovate better than 20 blue M&Ms. So the question that I've been asking for a long time is really, why is this happening? What are women bringing to the table that is so different and so valuable that we actually increase our innovation capacity just by virtue of having that mix in the room? And the better we can understand this, the more we can stand our ground in terms of the value that we bring, and the more that we can reproduce those results in a more systematic way, and the more we can help other women understand the value that they're bringing to the table. So that's what I'm about, and that's a little bit of what this presentation is about, because there's only so much we can do in an hour. But let's talk a little bit about the gender equality, gender diversity imperatives, because they are substantial. Some of you will have seen some of these already, but I just want to touch on them for giving us context. So there's a commercial imperative, a huge commercial imperative. Women make 85% of consumer spending decisions. And out of that is a $20 trillion spend annually. I was at a conference in Jakarta, and the guy who was the GM for Asia Pacific region was presenting this wonderful work that his company had done on trust and branding. And they gave slides, they gave us presentations, they gave us analysis, they gave us the data, they told us all the important things about trust and branding. And he finished the presentation to huge applause. And I was sitting somewhere near the front, and he said, it's question time. And I said, so can you tell me the impact the gender had on your data? And he looked at me, and I thought, oh dear Lord, I've embarrassed the man in front of the entire room, and I never intended to, but I wanted to know. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, women make a lot of consumer purchasing decisions. Can you tell me, when you analyzed your data for gender, what that meant in terms of the way women relate to branding and trust? And he went white, and he said, we didn't do that. But we'll do it next year. So what we're seeing is the beginning of an awareness, right? We've still got a long way to go, but it's a huge market, huge opportunity. The other thing is the market imperative. The market imperative is mind-blowingly large. The female economy is actually orders of magnitude 10x larger than the economies of India or China. So from a sheer purchasing power standpoint, we do hold the purse strings. The resource imperative, this is worrying if you have sons or nephews, but from a female leadership perspective, it's very exciting. There's a huge growing number, and projected to even accelerate that growth, of women graduating from college, higher than it's ever been in our history. So for resource-strapped companies, particularly companies here in the Valley, we have to learn how to be able to engage women more effectively. The National Competitive Index, and this is some fantastic work that's coming from the World Economic Forum, is basically there's a direct relationship between your gender gap index and your competitive index. So the less your gender gap, the more competitive you are as a country. So not only are organizations and teams looking at this, but countries are looking at it from the perspective of how do we improve our balance. This is work that was done by John Gerzema, the guy who wrote the Athena Doctrine. And if you haven't read it, it's a great book to read. But what they did was they interviewed 64,000 people from all around the world, and it accounted for about 65% of the GDP of the world. And what they came back with was an understanding that said 81% of people agree that we need both masculine and feminine qualities in our leadership capacity, both as individuals and as organizations and as countries, to be able to succeed as the world gets progressively more complex, and also as we look to enjoy it more. And then the other thing is that 66% agree that the world would be a better place if men thought like women. I think that'd be interesting, but we'll put it out there anyway as an interesting imperative for people to start thinking differently about women's leadership. So the results that are coming out from people looking to address this market and commercial imperative are amazing. Now, the results, depending on where you get your results from, depending on who's in the room when you're presenting your results, there's negotiations around, the accuracy and the infallibility of the results. But the results themselves are very interesting, regardless of whether there's a margin for error. Fortune 500 companies with gender balanced boards put themselves in a position to outperform others by upwards of 50%. And that's a monumental number, right? We work really, really hard every day, sometimes to just stay even. And what this is saying is, if you bring gender balance into the equation, you have an opportunity to actually be able to increase your results by upwards of 50%. And then you can begin to see return on capital, return on investment, return on equity, return on sales, huge increase in the numbers there. I love this particular one because this is relevant for all of us. So this is startups, this is women in innovation. This was actually presented by data coming from Enterprise Ireland, who collated all of this information. Heather Humphreys, who's Ireland's Minister for Enterprise and Innovation, presented this at a conference about a month ago. And what's showing up is for startups that are women-led, for startups that are, for VCs that are investing in women-led companies, at last. We get 12% better, 30% better, 33% better. The numbers are just overwhelmingly positive. And then social impact results, because they're important and because a lot of us do care about them. And a lot of people, I'm sure, here volunteer and work in the not-for-profit space. But what we're seeing is that for every dollar a woman earns, 80% of it goes back into her community. And for every dollar a man earns, it's a bit different. So this is super interesting data coming out of work that's been done in Asia and really pointing to the importance of investing in women. So the question is, why is this happening? Okay, we're getting to the point of balance. We're not getting to the point of balance, we're trying to get to a point of balance, but we have to understand what it is that we're bringing to the table in order to be able to understand the impact that we're having. There's a fantastic story. I thought this little guy was cool. There's a fantastic story which is, actually, it's not even a story, it's a Native American proverb. And what it says is that there is this notion of the bird of humanity. And someone in the audience has heard this. This is a good one. So Lynn Twist, who's a fantastic organizer and fundraiser, and she was the woman who was the CEO of the Hunger Project, and she actually cries on stage and manages to look powerful and vulnerable. I'm working on that. I won't do it here, so don't worry. But there's a fantastic Native American story, proverb, that basically says the bird of humanity should have two wings and should be able to fly with two wings. But up until now, the bird of humanity has been flying with one wing, and that wing has been overextended, and that wing has been forced to support the whole of humanity with just that one wing. And so it's flying out of orbit. It's flying. Two birds fly in orbit. It's flying out of system, and it's circling around, and it's flailing because it's only flying on one wing. And until we get gender balance within our society, the bird of humanity will not be able to fly with both wings. So beautiful visual and beautiful proverb, and something that we're all working towards, but this little guy is a reminder for us when we see when it's out of whack. So with this question of why is this happening, I took a couple of steps back and said, what is it about the way that we work together that precludes us from being able to get to this balanced understanding of what is leadership and how we contribute to innovation? And really what's happening is our model for the way we work hasn't changed in 70 years, and I'm being generous with that. It probably hasn't changed in a lot longer. But if we say it hasn't changed within 70 years, and what's happening is that we're seeing that the perception, which is where a lot of the unconscious bias comes from, is really very, very skewed towards what men consider to be valuable. So ratings are designed to measure performance of the ratee, but the reality is that they're more of a reflection of the person who is doing the rating. So unless we are able to understand what it is that we're bringing to the table, we're not going to be able to have people really rate us as effectively or as with an understanding of the value that we bring, and that's something that we definitely want to change. So to just give you a silly, funny example, and some of you probably resonate with this, I spent a fair amount of my career trying to stay warm. Yeah, there's people here who have that problem. And the interesting thing is the temperature control, both for AC and for heating, was actually, the standards were put in place in the 1960s. And they were put in place based on men's thermal demand. Now, men's thermal demand from the 1960s is about 35% variance from my thermal demand in the 2000s. So those of you who have spent large percentage of your time trying to stay warm at work, this is one of the reasons why. Now, we can laugh at this, because it is actually funny, sad as it is, but that's happening with everything that we do. So every standard that we're held to, every metric that we're asked to deliver on, everything that we consider valuable in organizations was basically designed in the 1960s or in the 1950s by men and for men. So the results are extreme disengagement, not just for us as women, but also for a lot of men. And what we're seeing here is 75% disengagement at work coming from the Gallup polls. Executives don't believe that their performance ratings are really supporting and helping people grow. And then also there's 64% of professionals don't feel empowered to perform their best at work. That's disastrous, right? We're now working in a place where the majority of people are just showing up, if even. So what I've been working to do is try and bring a new perspective to this, to bring a new lens. So if you think about the thermal heat demand and you look at us all being cold at work, the other way to look at this is to understand that we've really been looking at what human beings contribute to work through just one lens. And we're going around and valuing everything based on that. There's one way of leading that we've thought about, one interpretation of leadership, and everything we do and measure and value is based on one way of leading. And that one way of leading is valuable and useful, and it's absolutely got us to where we are, but it's only half of the leadership capacity of humanity. So we tend to look at leading as being action-oriented, as being about quantification, as being about competition, as being about logic. And so what we're doing is our leadership is very, very much focused on that. I don't think there's anyone in this room who can say they haven't had a performance evaluation that didn't have action-oriented on it somewhere in that whole process. So what we've done to try and fix this problem is we have put in place special programs for women, and I'm sure you have some of these programs, where we have work-life balance, where we have special interest groups, and where we have a high potential leaders program. And we've taken women outside of the mainstream of work and provided these special help programs for them as we try and move towards a higher level of gender balance and a higher level of innovation. Now, the equal pay one, I'm not even going to talk about. As far as I'm concerned, that's just end price of entry. That's not up for discussion at all. But what we've been missing in doing this is we haven't been looking for new ways of observing what is leadership, new ways of understanding what it is that women bring to the table as leaders, new ways of listening to each other, new ways of interpreting what is really valuable, and new ways of leading. So that's what we're going to briefly talk about in the time that we have. So let's talk about the way that we work, which is a way of getting to an understanding of this. I love maps because I find them to be incredibly useful. And so what I'm looking today to do is to give you a little bit of a map. The nice thing about maps versus directions is I can give you a little piece, and if I can give you a compass to learn how to navigate, you can begin to add to your understanding of that map over time, which I think is something important. And if you turn your head sideways, you'll see this is actually a map of Ireland, so I'm just having fun with, I'm from down here at the bottom, it's actually on the side, but it's a 16th century map. And what they did was, you can see the way they added to it over time, so all the little red dots are towns, and so over time, people added to the map as they learned more about the country. Now, you'd be pleased to know, despite the fact that this person obviously thought that Ireland was incredibly wet and covered in rivers and lakes, that it's actually not that bad. So there are two factors to the way we work, and you have sheets on your seats, which are a small exercise that I'm going to ask you to do to kind of follow along with what I'm doing here, just to give you some space for thinking. There are really two fundamental factors in the way that we work. One is how we as individuals approach our work. So we have a natural, sometimes unconscious way in terms of how we engage in work. And the other one is how we choose to apply our energy. So what you'll notice in the process is people tend to focus on and direct their efforts towards what they consider to be valuable, what they enjoy, what gives them positive feedback, what gives them reward. And any of you who are leading people, you know how to be able to engage people based on their interpretation of what's valuable and you helping them with building that. So the way we approach work has really got two polarities. Now, it's not a spectrum, it's actually two poles, because we can't do the two of them simultaneously. We either sit quietly back and try and make sense of things, or we jump in and we take action. And I think the questionnaire has you saying, how do you do that as an individual? How does your team do that? And how does your company do that? So some companies have a prevailing culture of jump in and take action. And we can see with some companies the issues and problems that leads to. But there's a way that we approach work, which is either perception or action. Where we choose to apply our energy, which is again an indicator of what we consider to be valuable, is we apply our energy to the stuff. Some of us apply our energy to making the products, to designing the things, to actually the tangible things that we can put our hands on. And others of us apply our energy to the space between the things. We look at how things connect to each other, about if we have a strategy in place, what the impact of that strategy is going to be from a collateral impact standpoint. And the interesting thing is, the space between the things is where a huge amount of the innovation is happening right now in the physical sciences. So this is a very interesting parallel for us to look at. One of the areas where this is very exciting is if you take a simple atom, the atomic structure, which I'm sure you all have some familiarity with, some of you are probably experts, and you look at the space inside an atom. So the space inside an atom is 99.99% of the atom. Just think about that for a second. That is the piece that we as organizations have been gleefully ignoring and leaving, sometimes parking it and hoping that somebody will magically solve our problems when it comes to the space between things, when it comes to the interconnectedness of things, when it comes to the collateral impact of decisions. And so by beginning to learn and recognize and pay attention to that space, we're bringing an enormous amount of value to the table. So innovation really happens to a large extent in the space between the things. So the space between the possibility, or sometimes people will tell you it's impossible, and the reality. And one of the people who's really playing strongly in this space at the moment is Elon Musk, doing some really interesting work around space and possibility, and literal space and possibility in this particular case. And so when it comes to innovation, it's the people who can say, we're going to take this huge leap forward, we're going to figure out how to bring large numbers of people with us, we're going to be able to translate that into efforts around innovation in our workplace. Those are the people who are bringing enormous value to the table. And the interesting thing about it is, depending on how you chose to answer your questions, I'm sure a lot of you will say, I tend to sit quietly and try and make sense of things. I'm not jumping up and down, raising my hand and jumping in to take action. And I'm also looking at how things connect to each other. What happens when we make this decision? What's the impact of that decision? What happens when we move in this particular way? Is this department going to be impacted? What happens if we do this? Have we involved these people in the decision that needs to happen? And we're looking at the interconnectedness of things, of strategies, of projects, of opportunities as we move through things. And it is, I believe, an innate female leadership capacity to really be able to do that. And it's something that we tend to do naturally. So let me give you a little bit of a compass for navigating leadership. So if we take those ways of working and we say we have how we approach our work, whether we're sitting quietly and making sense of things, or we're jumping in and taking action on the y-axis, or whether we're looking at the space between the things, the interconnectedness, or we're focused on the one thing that's right in front of us. So that gives us a little bit of a compass for how to move around. So what we'll see is a lot of companies run exclusively on focused action. Did you do it yesterday? How fast did it happen? Don't take time to sit back and to perceive what's going on, just get it done. It needs to happen yesterday. So we have this enormous sense of urgency, and the enormous sense of urgency lends itself to support of this exclusively focused action way of leading. And that's fantastic if your house is on fire. If the plane is about to crash, if your network is down. Actually, I have a network down, yes, so we couldn't possibly have a tech conference without a Dilbert cartoon. So if your network is down, focused action's really, really important. Someone needs to make decisions, they need to make them fast. If you don't have processes in place to deal with it, it needs to be dealt with immediately. So focused action is useful for when your house is on fire and the plane's about to crash and your network's down. But the problem about it is it can actually be very damaging overall over a long period of time, because what it does, if it's left out of balance and that's all that you do, is you end up in a situation where it expands beyond its own effectiveness. And you end up in a position where there are people who are micromanaging and controlling, and you have this destructive competition. So one of the ways that you begin to see that is what we're all with is bro culture. So that's a situation where you have a lot of one-on-one competition and where you have a lot of just singular focus on immediate action. There's a really interesting story that was coming out of when Ford Motor Company started selling increasing number of cars, increasing volume of sales around their cars. And the head of the Transportation Authority, which I'm sure was very small at the time, went to his engineers and said, I want to understand how much pavement we're going to need as the number of car sales increase. So they did their analysis and they looked at how much paving needed to happen. They looked at the existing roads that were there, which would have been from horses and carts, and it wouldn't have been paved. And they came back and they said, we're going to need to pave the whole country. So when people work exclusively in focused action without looking at the broader perspective of things, you end up with this environment where people come back and make recommendations to pave the whole country. So over time, what happens if you work in this focused action environment, it can disintegrate into exclusive cliques. So you know yourself, if you have a bunch of people who are working in the middle of, let's say realistically, trying to get your whole your network systems back up, and they're huddled in a room, you're not going to wander in there and start being part of that if you haven't been part of it from the beginning. So what happens over time is these focused action environments create organizations and teams and ways of working where people are excluded. So the other thing that's interesting about this is there's a whole other part of the spectrum, as you can imagine, and this is interconnected perception. They did something funny to the typing on the slides, but never mind. So if you then take focused action as being one way of working, there's another way of working that tends to be the one that we've kind of ignored over time, which is interconnected perception. Much, much more useful for really longer range thinking, much, much more useful for looking at more strategic opportunities, and much more useful for looking at deep jump forwards in innovation rather than incremental innovation. And this is from the long now. So they're saying that our interpretation of now is 3 days, and our interpretation of nowadays is 30 years, and our interpretation of the long now has shifted, and we tend to look at the future as being something that's going to happen within our lifetimes. We don't necessarily look at the future as being something that's going to happen 1,000 years from now. So the interconnected perception is one that takes a much, much longer term perspective on things and begins to look at the long-term value for humanity of some of the decisions that we're making. So if you take the interconnectedness and you take the perception together, so the space between the things and looking at sitting quietly and making sense of things. This is hugely valuable, and it's hugely valuable for our long-term thinking. It can also be detrimental if it's out of balance and exclusively used on its own. So we can end up with things that just disappear off into the ether, opportunities, projects that sort of started off fantastically and never really happened because we didn't convert what we needed to convert into action. So you end up with overwhelm, anxiety, victimhood. So these two things, you can see the polar opposites beginning to kind of pull apart from each other and disappearing off into the ether. And they can also deteriorate again into their own version of these highly exclusionary groups, where we end up with the overwhelm and the anxiety. So victim culture is sort of, I would consider to be the flip side. So why is it that organizations that are out of balance, that have these cliques in terms of the way that we work, why are they less effective and less innovative? The reason why they are is because it excludes people. It polarizes organizations. A very specific, very focused way of working only creates an environment where people who are looking at the longer term don't want to be involved. And so what you end up with is you end up with this highly polarized workplace, and people feel disengaged and disconnected. Since you can only work in one mode, since you can only be in focused action, or you can only be in interconnected perception, as you get more sophisticated, you can obviously move back and forth from one to the other. But for the majority of us, as we start engaging in this way of working, we can only be in one at a time. And what happens is they polarize each other, they push each other apart. So what we see is organizations are less effective and less innovative. So as you start measuring where people fit on this scale, you begin to see that the ones that are on the polarizing line, they're the ones that are the least effective. The good thing is, organizations that are in balance, which are the ones that we're interested in engaging in, the ones we're interested in working for, and the ones that are beginning to show some of these incredible numbers, are the ones that are in balance, and they are more effective and they're more innovative. So the bird is actually flying with two wings. And what we're seeing is that leaders who are able to amplify the qualities of other people and engage people based on how they choose to approach work and how they engage in work, those leaders are the people who are creating environments where we can take advantage of this huge innovative capacity that we have that is in effect latent. So what we see is they're capable of leveraging the traits and qualities that I mentioned on either sides of that polarity. So complementarity amplifies value that we can bring to organizations. So whereas I might approach work from the perspective of looking at the interconnectedness and being deeply perceptive about what's happening with a decision, someone else might approach it from the perspective of focused action. It's when we bring those two together in a room that we really begin to get the return on the value of the diversity that we're bringing to the table. So you'll see focused perception is when those two come together. Interconnected action is when those two come together. So complementarity, and again, they really do complement each other. So when you're building teams, when you're thinking about who are the right people to put on projects, if you start looking at their leadership capacity from this perspective, what you will see is that those pairings are the ones that produce the most innovative results if there is deep respect and deep understanding of what the other person brings to the table. So for the complementarity, what you'll see is you'll see the flexibility and agility because we're bringing perception and focus together. You'll see the observing and understanding of synchronicity because we're taking that slightly longer range view of things. And you'll see a certain level of risk mitigation because we're not even running headlong into something. And for the interconnectedness, what you'll see from a complementarity standpoint is you begin to get an understanding of a different level of longer term accomplishment, and you'll begin to see some of that resilience coming into play. So these are really at the heart of our innovative capacity. And what we see is that as we bring balanced gender to the table, these are the qualities that begin to show up from a leadership standpoint. So if you want to think about what can I do with this, how do I translate this into my own team environment, is start beginning to identify who are the people who can amplify the capabilities of others. Who are the people who have taken the time to understand, and you can give them some tools now to begin to understand, you can give them a compass, to begin to understand how do other people approach work? How do they engage with work? What do they consider to be valuable? And how is that different from what I consider to be valuable? And you can start engaging the engagers. So the engagers are the people who are moving above the line, and they aren't excluding others because they don't work like them, they don't work at the same pace of them, they don't consider what they consider to be valuable as valuable. And what they're doing is they're looking to build those bridges and understand that. And what you'll see over time is people move from, particularly interestingly enough, women move from not fully understanding what it is that they're bringing to the table in terms of the value that we bring, to moving into a new level of confidence. I can now speak about what it is that I bring to the table. I bring this longer term perspective, I bring this understanding of interconnectedness, I bring a different decision-making style, I bring a different way of including people, I bring a different way of engaging, I bring a different way of thinking about innovation. And what happens is we now begin to name and own our own qualities of leadership. So we move to a level of confidence, and then over time we start being more engaged, and we start being able to engage others, because now what other people are doing when they're in their focused action space, I can make more sense of it. I can begin to see why it is that they're jumping in that direction. They consider that what they're doing there as the work that they're focused on is valuable. I might not consider it to be valuable in the bigger scheme of things, but I can have that conversation. And then what we see is people who are astute observers of this and really learn how to do this type of work end up amplifying and including those around them. So I'm sure that you've all at some point, I hope you've all at some point worked for someone in your career who has been able to bring all parties to the table and who has understood how to be able to tap into all of the resources in the room. Those great leaders, whether they're men or women, are the people who are able to amplify us based on the way that we choose to work and the way that we work. So organizations that are in balance are more effective and more innovative, so they're bringing all of the components of leadership to the table. And over time, what happens with those organizations is the amplification capability begins to reveal itself in the leadership qualities, in the innovation capacity, in the strategic decisions that are made, and you begin to see the results that we're seeing coming out of gender-balanced organizations. And the bird of humanity begins to fly. And that's it. So I'm very happy to do Q&A. Absolutely would be delighted to hear what your thinking is on this and how it resonates for you. Love to hear what you thought of the questionnaire and how you responded to that, what sense that made for you. So do we have a mic so I can hear people? Do we have any questions? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stella. I'm with Wavefront by VMware. My question is about your talk in general. When you presented in majority mixed audience, what is the reaction typically? And the second question, who in your mind would be an innovator in between possibility and reality that's on ladies' side? Just name it.
Yes, yes. Great question, thank you. So in a mixed environment, so I haven't done this particular presentation in a mixed environment. What I set out to do with this thinking that I have done in other forms in a mixed environment was very much, my belief was, because I had grown up in a predominantly male environment and worked in a predominantly male environment pretty much my entire career, and starting off as an engineer, I was one of 3 in 5,000. But what I was interested in understanding was, if men understood what we brought to the table and could put words around it, how would they leverage that and value us more? And what I've seen is, once you start presenting this idea in a mixed environment, there's a relief. There's like, oh, that's what they're doing. I get it, that is really valuable. And one of the questions I asked as I was doing this research was, I asked a lot of senior women and I said to them, so how many times have you been brought into a room and asked to just come because you do that thing that you do. And every single one of them laughed. And they said, yes, but what is that thing? You're just asked to show up because you're doing something. Now, a lot of us start off thinking we're doing something that's unique to us. And then over time, as we start conferring with other women, we realize, hey, hold on a minute, we're all asked to come to the meetings to do that thing that you do. So my goal here was to be able to shed light on what it is that we do so that our male colleagues could understand it and value it. So there's from what I've seen so far, and this is relatively new work, there's a sense of relief of going, fantastic. Now I can talk to them about it, I can design my innovation differently with it, and I don't have to kind of dance around it. And we're also all smart enough to know that we don't fit into pigeonholes, and that's the last thing that we want to do. We can move back and forth across the different capabilities, but now at least we have a way of talking about them. And then your other question was women who are innovating in the space between. The interesting thing about it is a lot of the innovation that's being done in the space between is being done in the not-for-profit space. So there's tremendous innovation happening around how to educate illiterate people, how to use telecommunications to help people with remote learning from a visual standpoint. There's women are doing really amazing innovation in there. And I think if I was the CEO of a major company in Silicon Valley, I would be actively looking at these innovations that are happening in the not-for-profit space, because women are really engaging and connecting and trying to make sense of deeply ingrained practices and understandings that human beings have in these situations. They're coming up with these incredibly innovative solutions. So I think you're not going to see them in the mainstream. You're going to start seeing them on the periphery, which is what you would expect, because innovation happens on the periphery initially, and then it'll begin to come into the mainstream. Great question, thank you. Yes?
I'm curious, thank you. Lindsay Siegel, thank you. I'm curious, as we move into this next generation, moving into technology and really leading our workforce, when we talk about gender, we're kind of moving into this new fluidity, right? Where we have just multiple gender associations. I'm curious, where do you see that going in relation to gender balance and that kind of conversation?
Fantastic. So first of all, I'm hugely excited about that. I have a 23-year-old daughter who has schooled me very carefully on all of this continuously since she was about 13. And she would consider herself gender agnostic. Good for her. So what I see is this enormous freedom, and I'm a huge proponent of enormous freedom, because I think when human beings are free, they're more creative and they're more innovative, and it makes life better for all of us collectively. So I think the fluidity is really powerful, because what it gives us room to do is to bring our best game to the table, regardless of what end of the spectrum or middle of the spectrum that we fit into. My daughter went around for many years wearing a badge that said no binaries. So I've been well schooled in no binaries. So I'm excited about it. I think what it means from a gender standpoint is that we all have a lot of learning to do. And I think that the innovation is going to happen from, again, the perimeter, from the people who are eschewing gender altogether and are forcing us to think differently about gender. So when I first started doing this work, my kid was 12, and she started beginning to express herself very differently from what I was used to. And then she started educating me. And so I've come through this entire learning process over the last decade and really developing a deep understanding for the beautiful innovation that's happening on the perimeter that we can all learn from. And I've tried to bring that as much as I possibly can into the work that I do, because it is the future and it's exciting.
Maybe I can just speak without the mic. So I was very curious, you started off the presentation by talking about what we measure. Sorry. Hi, my name is Padmaja, and you started off the presentation by speaking about what we can measure in terms of performance management and talent review. And then when you started talking about the compass, we really spoke about attributes that may not necessarily be measurable within a performance cycle year.
Yeah.
Or things like that. So
Yep.
what type of innovation are you seeing in performance management that would tie better to measuring results out of innovation?
So that's a tough question because I'm not an HR person, so I'm not hugely versed in performance management space in terms of the innovations that are happening there. In terms of how it's impacted me leading in organizations, very little. I am looking to, and I'm doing some partnership work right now with a senior VP of HR where we're looking to say, if we were doing the type of innovation that I'm calling for here, what would that look like? And I think that that is a huge innovation that HR can bring forward, because what it does now is it says we're using our human resources to really drive and amplify our innovation capacity. And I would love to see a lot more coming from HR in that space, and I'm delighted to talk to anyone who's doing work in that, because we're not seeing enough. We're seeing some of the sort of the Band-Aid programs, you know, where we're creating special interest groups, where we're trying to do our work-life balance. That's not enough. What I would like to have us actually be able to see is create an evaluation system where what one half of the population brings to the table is valued uniquely, and also the existing half has room to come play in this half too. I mean, all of us who've been around in our careers for more than 10 years, we know we've developed capacity on the other side. We know we've developed masculine leadership skills because we've had to. And they're sometimes super, super valuable. But by the same token, I'd love to be able to invite other people to the other side, and we could have a lot more fluidity and a lot more enjoyment and appreciation of each other. So not enough.
Hi, Diana Martin.
Hi.
I enjoyed your talk and perspective. What is your thoughts about the different generations and how the newer generation is hopefully thinking differently than the baby boomers or generation, you know, prior to that? I'd be interested in what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a wonderful business manager who's 25, and so she's a little bit of my sounding board. She went to school with my kid, makes me feel even older, but she's a lot of my sounding board, and she's done a lot of work around, she understands the concept of patriarchy very deeply. She's done a lot of work around the rape on campus, Me Too type work. And so she heard me speak on this a while ago. I brought her to a conference, and she was enormously excited, because for her, what it's doing is it is creating a bigger playing field for kids who are pretty much agnostic about gender and will choose to represent themselves however they choose. So the gender queer kids who are saying, basically, I was trying to translate what gender queer meant for my mother, because my daughter's queer, right? And I said, it basically means it's none of your business. So the nice thing about it is this creates a bigger playing field for leadership for the people who don't believe they should be pigeonholed. And to me, that breaks down all kinds of boundaries and gives all of us a lot more fluidity and a lot more opportunity. And I think if we're successful in supporting them in doing this, we are going to see an outpouring of innovation. And I'm very excited about it and actively doing whatever I can to help. And Ari, my business manager, is actually looking to say, I want you to come and speak to younger people. And I'm looking at doing a program for teenage women who are beginning to start college, so that they have a grounding in the value that they're bringing to the conversation. And I think the sooner that we can get them, the better. I mean, I didn't wake up to this until I was in my 40s. I'd love to be able to roll that back a lot further, so that we have kids who are in their teens understanding what they're bringing to the table. Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
Hi, B. Riley. I'm going to get maybe down into the more focus section.
Yeah.
Focus side. But so you've worked with a lot of larger companies. Do you have any best practices for how you can connect these capabilities of the teams across teams? So let me give you an example. It's easy to understand your own team and leverage their capabilities.
Yep.
And there's a lot of variability within there, as we've just discussed. So what are some of the better ways that companies have gone across and connected the dots across their silos without just getting into meeting gridlock or just pulling in the people that are that put their hands up the most.
Yeah. So that's funny. I do a newsletter, and I just published one this morning, which was actually written by a guest blogger, which was called "Wait, Bro, I'm Innovating." And it was basically saying the loudest voices in the room are the ones that are doing the innovation. And of course, what we're doing there is incremental innovation, and we're not doing the kind of leaps forward that we would all like to see happening. But I think in terms of the silos, let me give you a story. We had a woman at a workshop, and actually some people here were with her, and she works for the NHI. And their goal of this cross-functional interdisciplinary team that they had was to be able to create tests. So tests in a highly scientific environment can transfer from different departments because they're reusable in terms of how the tests are done. So they're very, very valuable asset for a research organization. And what they had was this group had been working for a year and nothing had happened. And they were at 0 tests. So she went in and she started, when she was at the conference I was speaking at, she went, "That's what I was doing." So what she was doing was she was really holding space for people to be able to connect with each other without direct competition, and to be able to create an environment where it didn't matter where they came from or what it was that they had to say. What was more important was what they were able to do together. So super simple example, but basically leveraging the interconnectedness that these people have, finding what the common thread was, and beginning to really break down the silos. And she was doing that just by virtue of being who she was, because she was a woman who brought incredible capability around convening, around asking questions, around bringing people out and allowing them to express their vulnerability in a safe environment. And so she was this natural convener, and they've now produced 8 tests in the last year, which is, you can't say it's 800-fold increase because they did nothing before, but it's a pretty substantial increase. So it's those sort of things, identifying the people who have convening skills and who really look to do that level of interconnectedness because it matters to them. Those are the sort of people that will begin to kind of move across teams and break down the barriers. And once we start understanding that, we can give them the space and the support and the cloud cover to go and do that kind of work and begin to see some of the results that we'd like across silos. Does that answer your question? Cool, thank you.
Sorry. I'm here.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Jayanthe. So my question is, what about the men? So every time I hear it, I really struggle with the fact that most of my career I've seen a lot of men that are like women, and many women that are like men, really.
Yep.
So I struggle with this classification based on who we see in the workplace. For example, if you tell boys from when they're little that boys don't cry, well then they develop a certain way, and you tell girls that you're supposed to look good and blow dry your hair and put on lipstick every time we're going to be on camera. So I see really a world where we're having room for the men and women to be more like who they want to be rather than. So just comment on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, so could not agree more. What I'm interested in doing is saying, rather than that we should all have leadership in a certain way, I'm interested in doubling the space from which we can lead, and where we choose to play is entirely up to us. So I spent the first part of my career being a man in a skirt. I was a very good man in a skirt. And I did it because I needed to lead. I needed to earn money. I needed to be quote unquote successful. And so I would like to have had that be a conscious choice. And I may have chosen to do the same thing, but I would like both women and men to be able to consciously choose where they want to go and not be groomed to fall into one path, exactly as you're saying. So if I'm a tomboy, which I'm a geologist. I spent most of my life in Wellington boots and hard hats. If I want to be a tomboy, then that's totally fine for me to do that, but I understand what the other side is and how to begin to leverage that. So rather than say there is only one way of leading, which again pigeonholes us, I'm interested in saying there's this much broader space from which we can lead, and you get to choose. I mean, some of the best men that I've worked for have been ones who were really able to integrate both. and were able to create, and through that understanding that they had developed for themselves, which to me is a level of wisdom and maturity, they were able to create space for us to be whoever it was we wanted to be. And to me, that's freedom.
Actually, bouncing off of her question right there, this is Madhuri here. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot more imposter syndrome in women. In being who they are, owning up to their successes, being able to just be there, out there and say, this is what I have done. Yep. Men do it more naturally. And what are your thoughts and comments around how we can get over that imposter syndrome and actually own our successes more confidently?
Terrific, yeah. So I think one of the versions I did of this was called Name It, Own It. Because I think what we do as women in organizations, there's a lot that we do that's invisible, both to ourselves, to other women, and to men. And until we make the invisible visible, it's not going to be valued because there is no way to talk about it. So what I set about doing was to say, I am tired of doing not only my day job at work, but also the other work that I do, which is part of the glue of holding the organization together, the process of making sure that everybody feels engaged and on board, the process of making sure that people are taken care of and have career paths and are looked after. And all of us do that for our teams on a constant basis. And so I got tired of the fact that I was constantly doing double the work and getting paid 75% of the It's never going to go there. And so what I was looking to do here was to say, if we can name it, we can own it, we can confidently stand in it, and then we can invite, obviously, anyone who wants to come play in that space to be able to play in it. So I think a lot of it is being able to identify what it is that we're doing, whether regardless of where it falls on the spectrum, and to be able to really value that and articulate that. So I had one woman who's my age, and she did this amazing convening job. She brought all of these people together from all over the country for this event. And I said to her, I just want to thank you deeply for your convening. And she started to cry. She said, nobody's ever thanked me for that. It's just assumed to be something that I do. And I said, no, this is a leadership skill. This is an enormous capacity that we do not really know how to leverage in organizations. Convening is a huge leadership capacity. And she was absolutely, kind of torn apart by it because she'd been doing it her entire life and nobody had ever recognized it or thanked her for it. So I think part of what we need to do is we need to be able to recognize what it is that we're doing, put words to it, talk about it, understand the value of it, and see where to apply it, and then expand our range as we naturally tend to do right across the whole space of leadership. Yes.
Hi, I'm Deborah.
Hi.
Early on, you showed a slide that said 85% of consumer decisions were made by women. Mm-hmm. And I think later you showed a slide that said maybe 67% of college graduates are now women. And in both those cases, I thought to myself, well, that's not really equitable. I think with the consumer spending, the point was if women are making decisions, we should be conscientiously marketing to women, and perhaps women are better at marketing to women. Mm-hmm. But what is the ultimate goal? Is the ultimate goal equity, meaning 50-50 in all things? And if that is the case, should we be working against the things that we're also over-indexed in, or should we only be pushing to improve in the things that we're under-indexed in?
Fantastic question. So it brings to mind the notion of the pink ghetto. So I think, for me at least, and this is much more of a personal perspective, I don't think you want to have 50-50 in everything that you do, because I don't think that that's going to fulfill us as human beings. I think it's going to limit our ability to be able to create and innovate together. What I'm interested in is that we have more of a say in the way things run, in the way things are governed, in the way boards of companies are organized, and we create more opportunities. I'd like young women to be able to be turning things down because they don't want to do them, them instead of having to scramble and fight our way to be able to be, you know, the VP of engineering because I'm the first one that's ever been there. I was talking before this conference, I was acting CISO for a while, and I went to a CISO conference, and I was the only woman there. And it was the end of a long day, and I was like, oh, not again, really. I've got to go walk into a room where it's me and the lads. And I basically decided that my cat had died. I don't have cats and I'm allergic to them. But this was my excuse for why I needed to leave the room. And it wasn't that I felt that we should have 50% women in that room and 50% men in that room. It was that we didn't even have a say. So I'd love to get to the point where it is much more of a debate, and I think that, and a discussion, and I think that the future generations, that's where we'll get to. Any of you who read or watch sci-fi, and I'm sure some of you do, my friends, you'll see movies and you'll see references in books where people go, what are you talking about gender? We don't discuss that anymore, that's irrelevant. So my ultimate goal may not happen in my lifetime, but I would love to get to a point where it's not even a subject of conversation, that we have enough deep respect for each other as individual human beings, that we don't need to be having this conversation. The only reason we're having this conversation right now is because we're not represented at the table. We're not represented at the table in corporations, in government, in boards, in leadership, internationally. And until that happens, we're not going to really be able to progress the way we would like to as human beings. So the 50-50 is just a ratio and a number. I don't find it that exciting.
So one of our risks as leaders is that we end up creating organizations that look a lot like us in terms of leadership and action styles, and then that obviously leads to imbalance. Yep. So what are your thoughts in terms of when we're hiring and when we're mentoring people, how do we find those people and nurture people that actually have different styles than us, and actually value that maybe and spread that in the organization?
Fantastic. So you take the compass and you read the book. But for me, leadership is a path to growth and wisdom as a human being. And if you see it as a responsibility and something onerous, then you're missing the whole fun side of it. So by looking at it as a path to wisdom and a path to freedom and a path to exploration, what you're doing is you're going to be pushing yourself to go, there's someone showing up to be interviewed by me and I have almost nothing in common with them. How do I begin to bridge those gaps? What information is there out there for me to understand the way different people see the world? Because what I've found over time is if you really start immersing yourself in understanding how different people see the world, your world gets 10 times bigger. And you end up having much more fun. You end up appreciating life even more. And from a purely selfish standpoint, I'm totally up for that. So in terms of not hiring people in our own image, I would be bored to death. I don't want everyone to be in my image because they're not pushing me, they're not extending me, they're not making me think differently, they're not helping me innovate in a different way, they're not pushing my buttons and making me learn how to be more mature and wiser. So if you're hiring people in your own image, you're missing out. I think it's just a cop-out and total laziness. But I think that there's a lot of work out there that can help you learn more effectively how to be able to engage with people who think very, very differently than you and engage and appreciate those people.
Hi, my name's Lily Davis. I think I can speak to a lot of people in this room that we're sometimes the only ladies walking into a room, like you said, lads. And can you talk a little bit about younger in your career or when you were coming up and you were a man in a skirt and commanding a room and maybe feeling a little intimidated or not respected, and how do you gain that leadership and command that room to have everyone kind of follow your lead? I think some of us, and myself included, struggle with that and making sure that we're coming off professionally, and where we could fall a little bit lower, maybe you could help us kind of understand that.
Okay, that's a tough question.
I know, sorry.
So I think in terms of commanding the respect, I was very fortunate in that I grew up in a family with 2 boys and 2 girls. And my dad used to always say his mother was one of the first women to ever go to college in Ireland, ever graduate from university in Ireland. So he got brought up by someone who would never have considered herself a feminist, but absolutely was, and working outside of the home. And so I was very lucky that I got brought up by this man who believed in equality. And he said that if he was rich, he would send his daughters to college. And if he was very rich, he would send his daughters and his sons. So it never crossed my mind that I wasn't equal. I mean, lots of people told me I was, but I was sort of not really listening. So I think a lot of it is how you choose to view yourself. And that sounds sort of easy. It's actually really, really hard. So it's every single time for me walking into a room, I was like, I would literally bolster myself up and look to walk into that room with an air of being in charge and being responsible and being perfectly well entitled to be there. The other thing that I found super useful was always wear great underwear. Because if somebody is blathering on and you're sitting there going, you're boring me to death, but I'm wearing leopard skin knickers, you are in great shape. If I am allowed to say that. So, sorry, I have to get a little bit of humor in here. But in all seriousness, positioning yourself to be able to walk into the room and knowing that you have as much value, if you have as much value being there, you have as much reason to be there, you have as much entitlement to be there. They want you to be there. And also what I found was really useful was I decided that men tend to hunt in packs. And if I made friends with 1 or 2 of them outside of the meetings, it always made it easier for me to be able to bring my point across. And to also, if they interrupted me in the meeting, I could go to them outside of the meeting and go, why did you interrupt me? I didn't realize I interrupted you. Could you not interrupt me next time? And so I think some of it is just that process of like edging your way in, which is unfortunate that we even have to do that, and it's ridiculous. My husband, who's had 30 years of me talking to him about this, did this amazing thing that he thought was absolutely amazing at work. He put on their internal Twitter thing, that I'm sure they don't use Twitter, but whatever, to their internal messaging system. And he said, you know, I think that women at work should use what the women in the White House have done, which is when there's 2 of them together in a meeting, they will acknowledge each other and support each other and reference back what the other person said. And he felt all good for a whole day. And then he got this deluge back of all these women going, yeah, dude, except if you're the only woman in the room. And he came back to me and he said, Jen, I can't believe all these women are the only women in the room. And I'm like, you so have not been listening for 30 years. So, you know, make friends, influence, but believe in yourself that you are much needed, right? It's not that they might not feel they need you in that meeting, in that moment, but my God, the world needs us. Because otherwise we are doing this bird thing. So, yeah.
Hi there.
Okay.
Over here.
I think I'm out of time. Oh. We do one last question.
To your right.
To my right, thank you. Sorry, the lights are shining in my face.
That's all right. Hi, I'm Marin. 2 quick questions for you. The first one is just with regards to the slide that you showed us around how women are more educated now and they're going to school more now. So I was just curious if you broke that down to computer science or engineering in general, how that number would look, and if it is going to, you know, look really bad, what we could do as an industry to attract more younger generation into the industry. And the second question, I was at another event just recently where I had learned that within the industry, the tech industry, there are women of color make up for 2% of our industry. Yeah. And from that 2%, 18% have actually left the industry within the last year. So I'm just curious to find out your opinion on this and see if what you had shared with us today and what we discussed, something that could be applied across the board to all women in general, or do you think it needs to be broken down by socioeconomic background, etc.?
Nothing like finishing with this tiny little question. I think once you start breaking down those numbers, yes, we are seeing it skewing away from women moving into STEM. We are not getting the groundswell that we would want to have had or that we have been looking for. And I actually find that very understandable. So one of the, somebody here asked the great question around, what are the innovations around HR that are happening in this space? I think if we were, if as a country we were seeing HR stepping forward and our leaders stepping forward and saying, we are thinking about leadership differently, we have this expanded interpretation of leadership, we are looking for people who can step into this more diverse understanding of leadership, I think we would start beginning to see a different numbers coming out of colleges. The other thing that I'm super interested in and paying attention to is, where are the colleges that are looking to teach people differently? Right? Because, we did this is how we lead, we did this is how we manage our air conditioning, but it's also how we teach. So we teach to the values and concerns and issues and interests of half of the population. I watched my child go through school and basically drop off when she got to about 9 because she was like, I'm playing chess, Mom, but I'm the only girl. And I don't want to do math, Mom, because I'm the only girl. And I cried because to me, what was going to be missing for her was this whole part of life that had to do with mathematics. It was fun and fabulous. And I think what I'm looking for and pushing for, and I think a lot of women my age are pushing for, is for us to begin to start thinking differently about how do we educate in our schools and how do we attract women into the space with the different way of seeing the world and the different values and the different focus that they have. So that's one thing. In terms of young women of color, I actually don't consider myself able to really speak about that because I do not have anything like the experience that women of color have had. I mean, I waltzed in here as an immigrant, but I'm lily white. I got lucky. And not only that, but when we got invaded, they made me speak their language, so I was doubly lucky. But so I'm not copping out on that one. I'm actively involved in a number of conversations with women of color who are leading some of the thinking in that space because it is a big issue and we do need to open doors. And some of them work on the basis of, I need to see people who look like me before I feel the door is open. And other ones are working on the basis of saying, once women who tend to be more inclusive become a greater percentage of the work population, then everybody will be included. I don't know which one of those two is true, but I do know that we've got to stay focused on it and keep working on it and try and engage on it. And I think, when you think to yourself, I'd like to just not do this anymore, you are actually spearheading change. And sometimes that means that we just got to stick with it when it's not as nice as we might like it to be. So not a solution, but certainly there are people, and start beginning to look at who's working in that space, who's engaging in it, who's thinking about it differently. And I can give you some pointers. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we should stop because this thing's saying that I'm way out of time and I have no idea when it ran off. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Really, really great to talk to you all. Thank you. I need to give this